Welcome to the British Chamber of Commerce Singapore's podcast channel. We're excited to bring you Season 3 of new episodes featuring in-depth content across Singapore, ASEAN and the United Kingdom. We've had some extraordinary guests on our channel, including Formula One's Claire Williams.
I'm a firm believer that any great team, any successful team has a great culture flowing through it. You aren't successful if you don't. So we put a lot of work into this.
Renowned mountaineer Kenton Cool.
That 2019 there with a client, a big storm came in and literally destroyed Camp 2. And I've got some video footage of Sherpas like trying to hold on to the tent fabric as it blows away. And
the Royal Navy's Commodore Steve Morehouse, commander of the UK Carrier Strike Group.
The squadron of F-35 aircraft we have on board is a Royal Air Force squadron, and the personnel there are drawn from both the Navy and the Air Force. So, what better way of showing just the efficiency and the joined-up nature that we now have.
And distinguished Sky News anchor Jeremy Thompson.
We had two little vans with satellite links, and we leapfrogged up the road to Pristina, the capital, throughout that first day, with non-stop coverage from basically inside a war zone.
We also sit down with the likes of TikTok, Twitch and Twitter and continue to bring you conversations around business and trade, leadership and people, sustainability, sports and arts and much, much more. Thank you, as always, for your support and we hope you enjoy this podcast.
Welcome everyone to the Everything You Wanted to Ask But Was Too Afraid To podcast series by the British Chamber of Commerce ICT Committee. We are clarifying and demystifying everyday technology concepts, and today we are tackling cloud. I am very lucky to be joined by Rama Balasubramanian, Managing Director of Google Cloud's business in Southeast Asia. There is no one better to be demystifying those cloud concepts for us today. And not only does Rama, our cloud expert, bring with her all that cloud knowledge, but also 30 years of experiencing leading pioneering technology companies. So I am very excited about how much wiser I'm going to feel after today's conversation. And Rama, like myself, you're not originally from Singapore, but you fell in love with the place and you've been calling it home for little over a decade. Is that correct?
Daisy, thank you so much for having me on. And absolutely, I have been calling Singapore home now for 15 years. I'm one of those individuals who came in for 2 years, and here I am a decade and a half later. My family and I have really enjoyed everything that Singapore has to offer: great education, safe environment, and many, many travel opportunities. And, I was reflecting on the amazing journey that Singapore has been through over the past 15 years or so. And I came here in 2007, and this was an era when Singapore was really coming into its own, and it was evolving from a gateway to Asia to a destination city. So we saw some amazing developments and innovation happen. We saw the rise of Resorts World Sentosa. We saw Singapore Airlines buy its first A380, and we saw Singapore acquire the rights to the Formula One races. And so all of this made Singapore a really, really attractive place to live. And of course, I came here because of the amazing opportunities in the tech industry. And I want to share a little bit about how special this place is. It is a hotbed of innovation and development. If you think about the massive shift that the country has made from physical infrastructure to technology infrastructure, it is a country that has over 95% penetration of mobile phones and wireless broadband. It's one of the first countries in the world that actually had 5G networks pervasively across the country. It has an amazing entrepreneurial community. So if you think about what it takes to start a business in most countries, well, here in Singapore, it's actually really easy. And the government makes it incredibly easy for businesses to adopt technology as well. And what I especially like as a technologist is the country is very, very fast to move into new areas. So if you think about blockchain technologies and the application to some really interesting industries like financial services and the rise of the fintech ecosystem here in Singapore. And then, you think about supply chain, which has been a very traditional strength of the economy. and how blockchain has really made an entrance into that space. And then the final thing that I would say, and this is one of the things that's really sort of near and dear to my heart, is I love the people here. The talent and the diversity is absolutely incredible. And it's really why many multinationals choose to make their home and their headquarters here in Singapore. I'm really excited because 2022 is the year where Google Cloud will celebrate its 5-year anniversary of our public cloud region here in Singapore. And it's also the 15-year anniversary of Google's presence in the country. So it's a really, really exciting time for us.
Yeah, it's amazing to think back on the number of years in Singapore's journey. So let's jump into this cloud then. So we talk about cloud all the time, but can you just make sure that we're all fully understanding exactly what cloud is? Is it more than just virtual storage?
Yeah, so the best way to explain this is to share with you how my day has gone. So first of all, I have been to 3 customers today. So I took a Gojek rideshare and I went to one customer. Then another Gojek picked me up and they transported me to a second customer. Then I went to a third customer on a different Gojek. And then from there, I came home. When I came home, I was a bit hungry. So I went out and I went on to Grab Food and I brought in some takeout from Grab Food. And right now we are doing a podcast, and that podcast will be available on Spotify or Google Podcasts or a number of other platforms. So let's think about that and think about how amazing that is. And I'm going to talk about the world of applications and software here in a little while. But each of these apps has some really special attributes. And there are 4 attributes that I want to talk about. The first attribute is that it's always on. So I can access all of those services at any time of the day, whether it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon or 3 o'clock in the morning. The second attribute is that it's very personalized services. So all of those Gojek cars knew exactly where I was. They knew my home address, they knew the address of my first customer, second customer, third customer, and then a Gojek took me back home. So it was very, very personalized. The third attribute is that it's incredibly simple. So all of these apps are sitting right here on my mobile phone, and all I have to do is to click on that app and all of those services become available to me. And then the final piece is that they're incredibly secure. So each of these companies takes my personal data really, really seriously and protects that data. So all of these attributes are enabled by cloud technologies. And very simply, cloud technology refers to technology and processes needed to store, manage, and access data that's transferred over the cloud, rather than data that remains on your computer's hard drive. The cloud is a network of servers hosted by the internet to store, manage, and process data. And the reason that people like to work with companies like Google is that we've invested very, very heavily in our own IT infrastructure. And now we're helping external organizations around the world by offering them the use of that infrastructure and platform to run their own applications at scale. And it's really interesting because I've been in tech for a long time. And in tech, we love complex jargon. But what I'd like to do is maybe simplify it a little bit and talk about a vending machine. So when you go to a vending machine, you take your nice shiny Singapore dollar and you put it into the vending machine, and guess what? Out pops a bottle of soda. And what's really interesting is that actually, as a consumer of that vending machine, I don't care what happens on the back end. So I don't care that there's a complex financial transaction that's happened. I don't care that there was probably some Internet of Things transaction that happened. I don't really care that there was a pretty complex supply chain and inventory management system that happened. All I care about is I'm able to quench my thirst with a nice cold bottle of soda. And so it's really that outcome-based delivery that's so important for this particular economy. And we sort of call that everything as a service. And maybe what I'll do is reflect a little on why this is happening. And so for all of the listeners out there who might be part of large companies or even smaller ones, your company may not be in the software business, but eventually a software company is going to be in your business. And let's think about what's happening to banks today. So a software company comes in and they try to become a bank. And the only thing that prevents them from being a bank is the regulatory authorities. So back in December of 2020, the government granted here in Singapore 4 digital banking licenses. And by later this year, we're going to have a launch of 4 new digital banks here in Singapore. And guess what? None of those banks is going to have a physical branch. It's going to be all digital. And so you have to think about what's happening under the covers here. All of that innovation is really software enabled. And you don't really care where that software is run. I'm a big user of Gmail. And the person that taught me how to use Gmail really, really well was my daughter. And, you think about sort of this next generation that's, coming into the workforce. They actually don't care about where all of these great apps are being run. They just care that it's easy to use and that it's online all the time. We call this the consumption economy. You might hear that term quite a bit. And we've really come to take it for granted. Here in Southeast Asia, we've added 60 million new digital consumers to the internet since the pandemic started. And in fact, the Southeast Asia region is on the path to becoming a $1 trillion digital economy by the time 2030 rolls around. And in fact, we're calling this the digital decade of Southeast Asia. Now, cloud has really enabled this consumption economy. And I like to call it always on. I use it when I need it. And by the way, I'm only going to pay for it when I need it. That's the really important part. So it's this consumerization that's really sort of proliferating the environment right now. Now, the other thing about this consumerization is that there's lots of data. There's data that's proliferating everywhere. And this is where I really love Google's mission statement, which is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. And I want to just unpack that for one quick minute. So organizing the world's information, cloud technologies are the best way to store and organize petabytes and petabytes of data. Now, the old adage is true. You can be data rich and information poor. And that's where the second part of the mission statement becomes really important. And that is to make data universally accessible and useful. And I'll give you an example of YouTube. So imagine you're a new user of YouTube. You come onto the platform and guess what? There's a standard playlist available to you. Now, if you're like me, I tend to rabbit hole. I love my TED Talks. I love my cooking videos. And so I'll sort of, I'll spend maybe 90 minutes on YouTube. And then I'll come back maybe a day later. And guess what? It's no longer the standard playlist. I've got at the top of the playlist my cooking videos, my TED Talks, and also recommendations on new videos, whether they be cooking or TED Talks, that YouTube is recommending to me. And we take all of this for granted, but it's this customization and really understanding what consumers want that's so critical to enterprises, whether it be a digital enterprise or a physical enterprise. So that's sort of what I think about when I think about the basics of cloud.
Wow. I don't know if we'll categorize that as basics. That idea, that scale and mass of how frequently we engage with cloud and cloud computing. I think you just painted the picture fantastically there. When we talk about cloud, and you started touching on there, Rama, particularly around the new banks coming in, this concept of virtual machines comes up quite a bit. Could you just elaborate a bit further on when someone mentions virtual machine, what that really means?
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. Most people tend to confuse virtualization with cloud computing, but there's some really important nuances to understand. And I'll perhaps give you an analogy from one of the hot topics of Singapore, which is real estate. You go into a typical condominium, and it's usually like a 20-story building with 4 apartments per floor, let's say. So you have something like 80 apartments. But they're actually interconnected by 2 lifts. And those 2 lifts open out to one of the 80 apartment units across these 20 floors. And that's really the idea of virtualization. Everyone feels in their own apartment that they have access to their own lift. But really, what they're doing is sharing a common set of facilities, which is the 2 lifts and all of the infrastructure that those lifts sit on. So public cloud services is really renting a service department inside that condominium complex. So you can come stay there for 15 days and you're charged rent for those 15 days. But you might need some extra services on top of that. You might need some housekeeping, a daily breakfast, some extra security, use of the swimming pool, and each of these services are provided with extra charge. And so there are services that sit on top of that basic virtualized capability. And this is the concept of virtualization. And it's actually where cloud computing started. But today it's really so much more, because today companies are using cloud services, i.e. services that sit on top of the basic virtualized machines, to transform their entire business. And some examples are a little bit what I talked about earlier. They're putting data in the hands of their employees with AI and ML to help them identify, predict, and size the most important and impactful business opportunities. They're enhancing collaboration and productivity, especially in this age of hybrid work. They're defending their data against threats and fraudulent activity. And that's a capability that used to be reserved for the very, very well-resourced organizations. And now it's become available to practically everyone, whether you're a startup or a large enterprise. And so as a result of all of these capabilities beyond virtualization, many new companies, mostly born in the cloud companies, realized that they could forego buying or operating hardware and simply start their businesses by partnering with public cloud companies. And this was the catalyst for great cloud native companies that we rely on today, like the examples earlier, Gojek and Spotify and many, many others.
So that's where that concept as a service kind of comes in. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Cloud enables everything as a service, which is a really, really powerful concept, both as a consumer as well as a business.
Amazing. And that as a service, X as a service idea, that's where this agility, scalability that's so often talked about by different cloud providers.
Yeah, absolutely. So in Singapore, we celebrate wonderful festive seasons throughout the year. And of course, we have amazing sales. We have 11/11, we have Chinese New Year, we have Hari Raya, and we have many, many others. And during those festive seasons, we like to buy lots of stuff. We buy clothes, we buy food, we buy home furnishings, amongst many, many other things. And the question is, where do we buy them from? Yes, we can go to a retail store, but more and more we are actually buying them on e-commerce platforms. And so if you take 2021 and the 11/11 sale that happened, more than 2 billion items were actually sold on 11/11 across Southeast Asia. And this causes incredible volumes on e-commerce platforms. Just to give you one example, everyone knows Shopee, which is a popular e-commerce platform here in Singapore and other countries across Southeast Asia. Their volumes actually spiked by 5.5 times within the first 2 hours of 11/11. And that's compared to an average day. So you think about that, 5.5 times just in the first couple of hours of a 24-hour sale. And so you have to really think about how these e-commerce companies like Shopee, Tokopedia in Indonesia, Carousel, and many, many others are able to essentially infinitely scale during these peak periods. And the answer is that they quite often partner with public cloud companies because we provide these e-commerce platforms the access to the computing resources of the companies that we belong to. In Google's example, we have 9 products with 1 billion users each. Now think about that, 1 billion users each. And we know these products really well. Products like Chrome, Gmail, Google Maps, Google Search, YouTube, just to name a few. And we've had to invest really, really heavily in computing resources that can handle those perpetual peak periods that are there as a result of these huge products. And so during sales like 11/11, Chinese New Year, and others, we offer e-commerce companies like Tokopedia, Carousel, Ninja Van, Zalora, and many, many others the opportunity to scale with the volumes that are required from these sales events. But what's even more fascinating is that we're seeing that it's no longer just startups and digital natives, but traditional companies taking their applications and moving them to the cloud. And by moving legacy applications to the cloud, these enterprises can benefit from faster development, innovation, and cost savings as they scale their volumes up or down without having to do long-term infrastructure planning. And an example that I would love to share is we're partnering today with one of the largest telcos in the Indonesia market, Indosat Ooredoo Hutchison. And this is a company that's unlocking a digital opportunity for 62 million small businesses in the country of Indonesia to position them for growth as the economy starts to recover. And Indosat are building a digital marketplace for these SMEs. And in that marketplace, these small businesses can really avail of some of the services that you think about that are very cloud friendly. Things like registering their businesses online, boosting collaboration and productivity. I talk about data, really understanding the power of consumer data and building out their products and services. And then, of course, artificial intelligence and machine learning kinds of applications to better leverage that data. So traditional enterprises have the ability to redirect some of the resources that they're currently allocating to traditional infrastructure and shift those resources to these really innovative projects, which is amazing if you think about what Indosat is really doing for the entire country. And this is really only accelerated over the past 2 years. The important piece, and this is what I talk to customers a lot about, is the cultural transformation that takes place. So you think about these traditional businesses and concepts like scalability and agility are actually really, really hard. So there's a big cultural transformation that needs to take place as they continue to innovate and develop these new services. So it's a really exciting time, both for digital natives as well as traditional enterprises, as they leverage cloud services.
Fascinating. You touched on it slightly before, but particularly when we're talking about transformation within businesses, I think that the concept of security is really high on everyone's list. Could you share a bit about what we need to be considering when we're thinking about cybersecurity in the cloud?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a common analogy today that data is the new currency, and it's absolutely true. And so I wanted to elaborate a little bit on the way we think about security overall. Now, security requires a combination of tools, best practices, and the ability to implement those tools and best practices. Now, an interesting data point is that most enterprises deploy on average 45 cybersecurity related tools in their infrastructure. Now, that's incredible if you think about the complexity required to manage 45 different tools and products. And now here's the thing, you might decide that you want to buy all of that hardware and software and all the tools that sit around it to protect all of the data that sits on that infrastructure. But if you've got a user where their password is password 1234, all of that goes out the window, right? Nobody can do anything about it. So what we're seeing is that organizations end up buying the tools, but they don't have the governance and the policies around it, either for the users or even for their own operations departments. And in fact, 95% of the hacks that are caused today are actually caused by human error. So it's a really big problem that many, many companies are trying to deal with. So as cloud providers, security is really important to us because it's our reputation as a service provider that's at stake. And we go to great lengths to protect our customers' data. An example that I'd like to give is we have heard the term encryption. And one of the great things about what we do at Google is we encrypt data by default, whether it's at rest or in motion. And it's a really important fact because, and I'll just share a travel analogy. When you get into a car, typically you fasten your seatbelt. When you ride a plane, you typically fasten your seatbelt. So you can think about encryption as that seatbelt. And the only way that you can get up and move around, for example, on a plane, is after it lands and the pilot gives you permission to get up and disembark the plane. And that's what's called a security key. So it's only when an individual has a security key that they're able to access that data. So encryption is a really important concept when it comes to data security. And if you think about the use of public cloud, the use of those services is increasing and expanding to more and more sensitive workloads. So giving customers control over their data is a really important concept. It's no longer a nice to have. It's something that's absolutely essential. And it's something that we're really happy with in terms of the way that we operate Google Cloud. Now, the other important fact that I want to share with you is that cybersecurity skills are very much in short supply in the economy overall in Singapore, as well as more broadly in Southeast Asia. So I always tell my kids, if you want perpetual employment, build up your skills as a cybersecurity expert, because those are skills that will never, ever go to waste. And it's a skill set that we are absolutely wanting every single technical individual to build up across the economy.
Fascinating. Yeah, a lot to think about there, and maybe even a career move. So in quick succession to cybersecurity and securing data, I think companies are very interested in, sustainability and their environmental impact. Could you share a bit on how cloud providers are balancing that need for huge data centers versus their contribution to the environmental campaigns and considerations?
Absolutely, Daisy, and you're spot on. Sustainability is becoming a recurring theme that we are seeing across many of our enterprises. And if you just sort of step back and think about why this is happening, the global pandemic redefined many of the priorities of businesses, and we've absolutely seen a reckoning in which organizations have had not only to declare their ethos, but align their business models to support sustainability initiatives. And IT departments are also becoming increasingly aware of the impact that they can make around corporate sustainability goals and their support for those goals. So Google recently commissioned a study with IDG of more than 2,000 global IT decision makers. The findings showed that 90% of decision makers noted that sustainability is a priority of their IT department, and 75% of those decision makers reported that sustainability is a must-have or a major consideration when evaluating cloud providers. Now, there's another study from IDC that projects that migration to the cloud itself between 2021 and 2024 should prevent at least 629 million metric tons of CO2 from entering the atmosphere. So I really and truly believe that this is a decade that will be absolutely pivotal in the fight against climate change. And IT leaders really need to implement new strategies and partner with companies across industries to achieve their sustainability goals. Now, I'm really proud of Google because we're committed to building the cleanest cloud in the industry. Google is the first public cloud company to achieve carbon neutrality since 2007. And we've matched our annual energy use with 100% renewable energy every year since 2017. Our next and most ambitious goal yet, we aim to operate entirely on 24/7 carbon-free energy by 2030 at all of our data centers, cloud regions, and campuses worldwide. So we're very ambitious because we need to be. We absolutely need to be, and we're committed. And many companies sort of ask me how cloud can really drive sustainability. One of the simple things that we do is we've got a machine learning tool that customers use to identify unattended IT projects across their Google Cloud infrastructure. And if you think about it, those unattended IT projects really use up resources. Last August, we used the same tool to analyze the aggregate data from all customers across our platforms and found that over 600,000 kilograms of CO2 was associated with projects that it recommended for cleanup or reclamation. So it's a very, very real tool that we can provide our customers, because by deleting those projects, customers not only reduce their carbon emissions, but they can also reduce their costs and mitigate risks. So it's a really interesting view around sustainability and how public cloud providers like Google can have a very direct impact on those goals.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Incredibly interesting and actually incredibly reassuring as well. Brilliant. Well, Ruma, thank you so much for your time. I said at the start, I'm excited to feel wiser, and I certainly do. You've demystified and clarified a lot of those clouding concepts and really given us something to think about. So yeah, I just really appreciate your time today.
Well, thank you so much, Daisy. I really appreciate your insightful question, and it was delightful to be here.
And thank you to all our listeners. We'll be continuing to demystify and clarify some of those everyday technology concepts in our next episode, and I hope to see you there.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the British Chambers Podcast. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe, and why not leave us a rating and review on Spotify, Apple, Google, and the other podcast platforms. For more information, please visit our website at www.britcham.org.sg and and tune in next time for a brand new episode.